Hey, awesome listeners. Before we dive into today's episode, I've got a small request. If you're enjoying the podcast, could you take just a moment to go and rate and review it on whatever podcast platform you're using? It costs nothing. It takes a brief moment, but it really means the world to us. Your feedback helps other people discover the show. So if you can hit that review button, share your thoughts. It's quick, it's free, but it really does make a huge, huge difference to what we're doing. Now let's jump into today's episode.
I'm Wem.
And I'm Lewis.
This is the Forest School Podcast.
Let's go! Hey, lovely listeners. We are here with... I'm slightly, fangirling. I'll be totally honest.
Same.
Cards on the table. I did not think... We're here with Heather Shumaker, who I did not think would reply to... It's quite a big moment for me, I'll be totally honest. I realised actually while I was flicking through this, so Wem and I are this is, some people will know, this is like our 200th, we're getting on towards 200 episodes of this, and we started doing it because I had set up this company, and Wem was coming to join, and then we were in the process of sort of leveling it out and going, we're going to run this together now. And it meant that we had to have all these interesting conversations about, well, what do you believe about this? And why do you think this thing?
What should our ethos be when we're working with children?
What should our ethos be?
Yeah.
And then, Heather, your book, It's Okay Not to Share, was genuinely the first thing that I gave to Wem, I think, and said, could you read this and then we'll unpick it? So
I love it.
I need to start with a very big thank you.
Yeah.
A massive thank you for the books.
Yeah.
Multiple books.
And now, mine is so red and dog-eared and covered in Post-it notes, as you can see. I've lost count of the number of people that we've recommended it to, and it's sort of helped us to, as Lewis says, kind of define what we believe in, and and it's so thank you
It's wonderful.
from me also.
I love it that you said, you used it as a basis to pick each other's brains too and pick apart the ideas, because there's very few people who will accept everything in the book, but many people will accept most of it. And it is interesting how we find our way and use these ideas to jump off and create the spaces that we need for the kids in our own lives.
Yeah,
definitely. I think I'd start with saying that. So this Okay Not to Share was 10 years old last year. And okay to go up the slide is, I think, 8
Sounds
years,
about right.
something like that. So we're a decade in from these books, and for people that haven't come across them, I wanted to read some of the chapter titles, because actually I read a lot of these, not all, but I read them out loud to our home ed group the other day, and they were genuinely cheering for some of these. It was just hilarious. Interesting. I'd left the book out. And we had a volunteer who was with us, who we were recommending the book to. And I just picked it up and sort of went, I'm going to see what happens if I read this stuff out loud. And they were going, so I was going I
think it was it started with Give Kids Power, which is, Only punch
away.
Friends, bombs, guns, and bad guys allowed. Boys can wear tutus. And they genuinely were spontaneously, yes, like this, in response to all of them. Our volunteer was she picked it up and looked at the chapter titles and was like, okay. Especially some of the later ones, the sensitive subjects chapter titles. And she was like, okay, this is big.
I wanted to ask because there's nobody that we've given this book to who's immediately gone, oh yeah, got all that. None of that's challenging whatsoever. How was the experience of getting something like this published? Because presumably you had to take this and what did people say when you kind of put it forward?
Yeah, it's interesting. That's a great question. Nobody in any interview has ever asked me that before. So I'm excited to share this story. Yay, Lewis. Really, these ideas, they're all based in child development, and a lot of people would say based in common sense, but it's the kind of common sense that gets obscured by all of our other filters that get in the way of life. So it doesn't look like common sense to begin with for many people. But when I was a brand new author, this was the first book I ever published. my agent tried to sell it to various publishers, and she sent it out to 17 publishers, and 16 of them rejected it. And she said, don't worry, Heather, because I was freaking out. She said, don't worry. Sarah is going to be the publisher for you, the editor at Penguin, who's going to buy this book. And I said, well, how do you know it's going to be Sarah? I mean, she's the last one. There were other ones we could have gone to in another round. But she said, look, Sarah has a 4-year-old son named Leo, and she's having a lot of trouble with him. And she said, I know that your book is going to completely match with all the challenges that she's having right now with her little boy. There's nothing out of the ordinary, just 4-year-old child who's giving their parent a little bit of runaround to how do you cope with life? And so, yes, exactly. Sarah was busy, but by the time she opened up this proposal and looked at it, she's like, yes, this is it. And then to give her credit too, besides deciding to see that this was worth sharing with the world, she's the one that said, we got to change the name of this book. We got to change all these chapter title names. So she's the one that came up with the idea of calling it It's Okay Not to Share. She said, sharing's a big thing. Everyone's going to go wild. I had called it Boxing at Preschool. Because I was really intrigued with the rough and tumble play and the ability to, let kids do physical play. She said, well, that'll sound like it's just for preschool teachers. Parents won't feel that they're involved. So she got rid of that title. And I wasn't so sure about It's Okay Not to Share, because even though that's what I was talking about, I've never said that sentence before. It was more like, you can have as long a turn as you want, more of a positive way of saying it. But she said, yeah, that's fine for the kids. But what we want to do is get people to pick it up, and they're going to be startled when they see that title. And she said, let's do that to all of the table of contents. Yeah. And I said, I don't care what you call the table of contents. I mean, I came up with those ideas. But as long as the content inside doesn't change, as long as the fundamental ideas don't change, we can make them provocative titles. So that was all Sarah.
Amazing.
Wow. Yeah, they definitely are provocative titles, I don't think. But that's really interesting. So you obviously wanted to publish the book, but did you not feel like, because I think that gives the book the titles and the sort of like, I don't want to call it combative, but the kind of, it's a hook nature of it. And I think that is obviously what drew me in. But did you not feel like you wanted that like combative start to the reader?
I hadn't envisioned it. I think I knew it was different. Well, I didn't really know this was a very different way of approaching parenting at all until I was in my mid-30s. So I thought this was normal. This is the way I was raised. This is the school I had gone to. This is all my mother and all her friends. This is how everybody did it. So it wasn't until I had my own children and I lived in a different part of the US that I looked around for preschool just like my childhood one, because that's what it's like. And it was wonderful. And I felt respected and loved and free to explore everything. And I looked around for that, and I saw these schools, at least in America, that a lot of chairs and a lot of flashcards, and there was no play, and they weren't punching each other. And I mean, it was just like, well, what's going on here? So, yeah, I'd actually forgotten. I went back to do research for the book, and I went back to my childhood preschool as an observer. And I'd forgotten about the boxing gloves and that there was that level of trust in children's play. I'd done it myself. I'd done it for years. I'd been a kid playing those kinds of games, but as an adult, I'd kind of forgotten. So we do forget. We do put our blinders on sometimes.
Oh, yeah. We definitely have, because our provision is wholly outside. We're in a woodland. We've got some sort of lean-to shelters, but we don't have any indoor space. The amount of time that stick fighting comes up as a thing in our groups, but when I say that, I mean not as a they stick fight. I'd say it's rarely a day can go past when someone doesn't have a fight with some sort of stick or with some sort of weapon but the number of times we're having the conversation with parents who are there or with volunteers who are there who are and going like, they're all right. We're watching it. They're all right. That's so interesting to hear that you hadn't remembered. So the process of going back to a school that was set up it wasn't set up by your mum, was it?
No,
Or
she
was
hired
your mum
in.
and somebody else?
Yeah, it was set up by two founders, Lee Rowe and Janet Stocker. And they set it up in 1969, which is the year I was born. So I had nothing to do with it. My mother at the time my brother is older, so he was the guinea pig that she practiced all her bad parenting on. And by the time I came around, she knew much more what to do, right? That's just true of everybody. And so she sent him to the local preschool down the street, and he was a typical 3-year-old boy. He wanted to play with kids, but he didn't have the verbal skills or the social skills to do it. So what he did, of course, was jump on their backs and choke them from behind. And, it's very typical behavior. It meant he wanted to play, but it was interpreted by this was a church Sunday school, as he was an evil child. And basically he was thrown out of the school, expelled. And my mother went home crying, feeling like she'd failed as a parent with this 3-year-old who was displaying really natural behavior, but it wasn't exactly pro-social behavior, but the teachers didn't recognize it for being just he wanted to make friends. And so then she looked around and found the school for young children, and where he was welcomed. And when he jumped on kids' backs and tried to choke them, the teachers did not assume he was a bad kid, and they didn't throw him out. They said, "Oh, did you want to play with that child?" And then taught him the social skills, like come around to the front of the other kid to initiate your play rather than, trying to kill them. So that's how she came to the school. She started hanging around and eventually got hired because she was just amazed. But most of us don't know. We don't know that this type of approach to being with kids even exists. Like most people don't know that forest schools exist. They have to be introduced to the idea, and then they have to get comfortable with it. But it's raining. You can't go out today.
If you're enjoying the Forest School podcast, we wanted to let you know about the ad-free episodes and exclusive bonus content that you can get by joining us on Patreon. If you go to patreon.com/Children of the Forest today and become a Patreon, you get ad-free episodes of the regular podcast plus bonus things. Plus, when we have guests coming on, we try and get a little bit of a heads up and shout out there so that our Patreon supporters can ask us any questions that they want of those guests before the interview takes place. So head to patreon.com/Children of the Forest. We really appreciate your support.
Yeah. I wanted to ask actually, which kind of leads on from what you're describing. So one of the key kind of messages through the book is it's okay if it's not hurting people or property, which is like such a touchstone for us. And kind of as you're describing, not that many adults really, and it's not their fault because it's not in kind of modern culture, modern society about play, about actually what play means, what play cues are, as you were describing with your brother, and that idea that all play is okay if it's not hurting people or property is quite new to a lot of adults, as you say. But I wondered about sort of when we're witnessing behaviour from children, which isn't hurting people or property, but it might be like unusual or surprising or not, or a bit out of control, which often makes adults kind of feel uncomfortable, and often an adult might feel pressure to try to control that play or to try to stop it. And I wondered if you think that kind of feeling of pressure is increasing in modern times, or whether it's always been there. Do you know what I mean? Whether there is which way it's going. Is there more of an awareness?
More pressure, definitely more pressure.
Mm-hmm.
Though, since Lewis was saying earlier, the books have been out for about 10 years. I do think there's, in some circles, much more acceptance, comfortableness with this type of approach as well. So it's going in both directions. The greater culture is having extreme pressure, not trusting children's play, not trusting wild and surprising play, not supporting the idea of, yes, it's okay to spend some time outside and play and not have to have all their math times tables and all their reading and writing, at age 4. Parents around here complain if there's no homework in their backpacks at age 4. They're worried their kids are going to fall behind. So yes, the pressure is mounting. And the surprising play is there's not as many people willing to let that happen.
So do you think that does come from that sort of drive for success in inverted commas later in life? It's much more about.
Oh, it does. Certainly in this country. I speak in different countries, and Canada is doing a lot better than the US. They're a little bit more, I would say, laid back as far as not worried about their kids' financial success when they're 5. Yeah. Whereas the US parents, they really are. And if you go to the East Coast in New York or the West Coast in California, it's much more extreme in those two sides of the country.
Thank you so much for listening, everybody. And we wanted to let you know that we want to hear from you, the Forest School community. If you've got questions, topics you'd like to explore, books you want us to review, share your ideas and thoughts with us by emailing childrenoftheforest@outlook.com. Your input is what fuels our episodes, and we can't wait to connect with you.
So interesting, isn't it? We've got a similar thing here, I think, in England versus Scotland and Wales. So Scotland are a lot more play focused. Their education system is, they're talking about delaying the school starting age, and they've got, and even Wales as well. There's so much more information about play. If you look at kind of government produced resources to inform people about play, Scotland and Wales are doing really well. And Play England, you're like, are you getting any money to produce anything? It's really sad. Yeah, really interesting.
But I do find that, I find that the fathers and the grandparents are extremely good influences on this conversation, because many dads are comfortable with completely ridiculous play and rough and tumble physical play or outdoor play, because a lot of them remember that's what they wanted to do as a kid and maybe what they were prevented from doing. They get in trouble for being too loud or being too rough or being too muddy or whatever it was that they remember. They were always in trouble for being active. And so those fathers today, it's not always fathers, but often they're the ones who's like, oh yeah, that's fine. I did that as a kid. Look, I turned out okay. They're not going to be a violent criminal because they're playing with a squirt gun or a stick or something. And also the grandparents, because they have that perspective from a different generation of, let the kids out, shut the door, and they'll come back when it's dark,
Yeah, that's very true. Our sort of company logo is on our cars, and it says teaching children, not curriculums. And
yes.
I often have older generation sort of stopping me and going, yes, I don't know what you do, but yes, I agree with that. It's funny. It's interesting.
They stop you. Nobody's ever stopped me, and I'm convinced it's something to do with this image.
You've got a big scary beard, that's why.
Maybe you should dye it pink.
I mean, don't tempt me.
Wear a tutu.
Yeah, exactly.
Heather, I was going to ask, because on the subject of pressure, so the OK Not to Share book was the first book that I'd ever come across that has, at the end of the chapters, you give, I can't remember the exact terminology, but you basically give these like scripting conversations of, okay, you've read this, if you're on board with it, and that's where a lot of books would stop. I've given you the idea, here it is. But having this thing of like, here's how you can say it if it comes up in the playground. Here's how you might want to discuss it with a teacher, and here's the way you can frame it. And as someone who has slightly wonky social learning myself, having like scripted conversations is like, oh, that's incredible. Was that something you knew was going to be in the books from the start? Was that something that somebody gave you feedback and said it would be great if you could do this? How did they end up in there?
Oh, I love your questions. Yeah, you never ask the things other people ask, so this is great. At the end of the chapters, those scripted suggestions of what things to say, also suggestions of please don't say these to your kids because it makes my skin crawl, makes my spine just go so I have both. I think I knew that from the beginning that I'd want some version of that. And it's partly because, remember, I grew up with this, and my mother taught there. And so I would hear year after year, long after I was, much older than the target age group, I'd hear these same sentences over and over said in this very calm voice, and they work. I mean, that's why they keep using them. And the school has developed certain phrases that just work. Did you want him to do that? Do you feel safe? You can have as long a turn as you want. There's certain things that just come up every day. And so they say them over and over. You can do hard things. There's just certain phrases that they say. And so these were going around in my brain for years. And I also knew that they were important, because if you don't know what to say, you're tongue-tied. And most of these situations is when the adult is feeling pressure, they're feeling judgment, everybody's watching, they're feeling angry or upset because their kid just pushed a button and they don't know how to react. They're feeling a lot of things. And when you freak out like that, you have no clue what to say. I mean, right, you always say the wrong thing. Things pop out, maybe stuff that your parents said to you and you didn't like it at the time, but it's what pops out. So I wanted to try to put in these new things that are in my mind, because I heard them all the time, so that here's something you can say. And the other thing is, when I was creating this book, I knew the ideas, but I didn't know the format to deliver it. And I wanted it to be, anybody working with kids is a little bit scattered, right? They got a million things going on. The kids are talking to them while they're trying to read the book. There's a lot. And so I knew that when you read a chapter, sometimes you think, oh, that was great, but how am I going to apply it? Or how am I going to use it today, tomorrow, the next 5 minutes? And I thought it would be nice to have a little recap and just make it totally practical, so that people don't have to scratch their heads too much. A lot of people say after they've read the book once, they just read that last page of each chapter as a refresher. Oh yeah, that's what I should have said yesterday when that came up. Okay, I'll try it next time. Yeah, short attention spans. And the fact it's not theoretical. I mean, there's theories in here, but this is practical everyday stuff.
Yeah, just for listeners' benefit, if anyone hasn't read the book, like an example, and this is, going back to that kind of words to avoid, be careful. And I think more and more people are becoming aware of that. I've seen some sort of stuff going around through kind of educational websites and things. And so instead of that, saying things like, you're close to the edge, look at your feet, use both hands, do you feel safe, and all that. And my job is to keep you safe. All of those kind of things. I was really interested to hear that you heard those all the time and they're in your head. Do you feel like they are still there now? It's like, do you feel like they've been absorbed as part of your internal monologue?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And my brother and I only have one brother, but he and I have both raised our kids according to this philosophy. And for one, it works and we felt respected. And the other is it's second nature. You often will repeat how you were raised unless you hated it so much that you're reaching for something else. And a lot of people who gravitate towards this philosophy did not like how they were raised, and they are reaching for something new. And so it's even more important to try to build those patterns and continue to say them, so that you're not just raising your children, you're raising your grandchildren and their children after that. Because people will repeat the patterns that work for them. And a lot of kids have said, I've never felt so respected in my life, and I've never felt ever as respected again as I did when I was in preschool in this place. We want people to feel that respect throughout their life.
Yeah, that's amazing. That kind of reminds me of something. When we ran a forest school kindergarten as well as part of our business for a while, and used as many strategies and approaches from your book as we could, and things like not having to taking turns, and not having to have a timer. If you're on the swing, you're on the swing for as long as you want to be there, and that's fine. And a lot about conflict resolution as well, which is in the book, and I'd love to talk more about with you. But the thing is, because we only ran 1 day a week in our kindergarten for the children, most of them were in other settings which obviously weren't using those approaches. And so and my daughter came to the kindergarten, and she was only 3. But she said to me, forest school kindergarten's different to the other preschool, because we're allowed to do different things. And I thought she would mean, climbing trees and using tools and things. And she said, and I was like, oh, tell me more. And she said, well, at preschool, if there's a problem and some children are arguing, I try to help out. And then the adult says, no, you're not supposed to solve the problem. Come to find an adult. So she was aware of the different approach about conflict resolution.
She's on it, to be fair. She's on it all the time.
Well, she's raised on the book. So she was like, she basically got told off for trying to sort out a conflict between her and 2 friends at preschool. Like, no, you couldn't possibly do that. You're only 3. And the fact that she was aware of it and went, hang on a minute, in this setting, I'm treated like this and respected like this, and in this setting I'm
Wow.
not. It's amazing how aware children are.
My hat is off to her. But it also shows, I mean, she may be extra good with her observational skills and her people skills. Like my brother would not have been the one saying that, right? But still, kids do notice. I find that with just the idea of sharing, you can take as long a turn as you want. Kids get it as young as 2 years old. It's a big concept for us as adults, but it's not that big for them because it's just common sense, and treat everybody fairly, respect each other. They get that. They don't want to have something taken away from them. They don't want to feel awful when something is taken out of their hands. And so, yes, I've seen kids do such amazing conflict management at age 3 and 4 that adults wouldn't possibly think they could do. But if you give them some tools that make sense and tools that work, they're very glad to use those tools and to see the benefit of them. And they will see the hypocrisy everywhere else too, and they'll point it out.
Hey, podcast listeners, if you are enjoying the show, there's a small but very powerful thing you can do to support us, and it's completely free. If you can take a moment to rate, review, and share the podcast, it means the world to us in terms of sharing all the wonky goodness that we're getting up to with more and more people. Thank you so much to everybody that's already left reviews. We do read them and try and reply to people if we can. Sharing it and getting the word out to more people really helps what we're doing. Thank you all so much.
That's the thing. That's exactly it, isn't it? It's yeah. Can you tell us a little bit more about that approach, the renegade approach to dealing with conflict? So, again, if people haven't read the book yet,
so one of the basic conflicts in life is sharing items, sharing people. But let's say with a swing, since you brought that one up, often there's just not enough of a certain object to go around. So we have to take turns with it. And I watched a group of 4-year-olds at my childhood preschool, and they were used to the fact that they trusted the environment. They knew that they could stay on the swing as long as they wanted. And so with no teacher watching, there was one special swing that could go around in circles. It wasn't a back and forth one. And it was not always up. So when it was up, it was quite popular. And one little boy was on it for a while. And the kids themselves said, "Oh, well, I want a turn." And he's like, "Well, I'm still having my turn. Why don't you start a waiting list?" So the 4-year-old who was waiting said, "Oh, okay." And she went off and she got a piece of paper. And these are kids who can't really read and write. But she knew the tool because the teachers had used it before. And she started a waiting list, and she marked somehow at the top that it was for the swing. And then she put her name down. And I think she only got her first letter because she didn't really know. But she made kind of a mark on the page. And then she announced, "This is the waiting list for the swing." And other kids came and added their splots and their marks, different colors, and they all knew whose was whose. And this is all without a teacher. Although the teacher had introduced the tool and the concept of, yes, he can have it as long as he wants. Nobody went, I want a turn. They didn't go off and tattle and yell and whine because there was no point. They knew that they would have to wait. And so then when he was done and went off to play with something else, there were several kids kind of hovering because they all wanted a turn, but they all pointed to the list, which was illegible to an adult, and said, "Okay, here's the list. Who's next? Whose is this green one?" And somebody went off and got Liesel because she had gone off to the sandbox, knowing and trusting they'd come get her. And so they navigated all this with figuring out themselves, but the tool had been introduced earlier. So that's what I mean. They can get it, and they can respect each other if they themselves are respected consistently by the adults around them.
Yeah, amazing.
I'm having
story.
a slightly out of body experience hearing you describe a thing that almost like word for word happens in our settings, down to the some of them only put their name, their letter down, and some of them just put a thing, and that
we have blackboards. We have blackboards and chalk. For them to do
excellent.
That. Yeah.
I've also moved to, I don't know if you're ever going to do a revised edition, but you're very welcome to this. I've started referring to in the book, I think you use the metaphor of magazines in a waiting room or a public phone box, and talking about how things people are, I've found, way less put out if I start describing things as a toilet. It immediately becomes funnier. You start talking about pooping. And then also I can go, well, their body's not done with the swing, just like their body wouldn't be done with the toilet. And then I go, well, I'm waiting for a turn. I go, he's still pooping. He's just still pooping, I'm afraid. And it immediately diffuses everything. And then everyone's all right with it.
Yeah, it shifts the brain into a way that they can both laugh and think about it differently.
Yeah. And I think we're...
Heather,
go on, Liz.
Oh, no, I was going to ask, because... So the waiting list is and things like that are tools that we've put in and through all our groups where kids come without their adults, but also slowly we bring it into toddler groups, and we have to teach the adults as well as the kids, and things like that people come on board with. But I think Wem and I both are aware that chapters like the Only Punch Friends chapter and talking about the benefits of it, and that as long as you can stop when the other person says stop, and we do loads of practice in our sessions in moments where everything's calm, like at the start of the day we might go, oh, just a reminder, do you know, if you don't like something you can put your hand up and say stop it, I don't like it, and they're all being on that. But it feels like that rough and tumble play is possibly one of the only types of play that I see or we've seen getting reduced and reduced and reduced, even in these pockets of quite progressive education. The rough and tumble is the one that's almost
it's an endangered species.
It's hardest to advocate for, because it's so many people have got such a, I think it's a combination of like pressure, but also a feeling of like, if you let any anger, violence, whatever feeling you want to put on it out, that there will be no shutting that lid. So we should just never do rough and tumble play, because it might let the cat out of the bag.
Yeah.
But there's lots of benefits to rough and tumble play. Would you be able to explain to people listening about some of the benefits you found and why rough and tumble play needs to come into more play spaces?
Yeah. And before I do that, I think you're right that it's definitely people are very nervous about that kind of play. And I think part of it is that violence. They're worried that it's going to turn the child into a violent person. And also, I think there's a fear of the sexuality of it, that we shouldn't even touch any bodies. Bodies shouldn't touch other bodies at all. It's just completely prohibited in our modern, like, we should be very sterile. But the point is that human children need to be touched. They need to be touched by their caregivers, and they need to touch each other as friends, especially. They've done studies that boys, again, I'll pick on my brother, but he's not the only one like this, that young boys often they don't have the verbal skills developed the way the young girls do. Many young girls develop the verbal skills more quickly than the preschool age boys. And so the way that they initiate a friendship is by shoving somebody, jumping on somebody, whacking somebody in some way. And that is the start of, hey, let's play. It's called puppy play. And so physical play, rough and tumble play, can be extremely important for boys and girls as well to form friendships, because friendship is absolutely foundational to being a human and to getting along with other people in a community. It's what is more important than friendship. And so these are kids just beginning to form their first friendships. And a lot of times the way that we're wired is to form that friendship, those first friendships, through physical touch. And then we're saying, no, you're bad. You can't touch that other kid. Don't touch them. So that you're not only making them feel awful, but you're preventing them from developing bonds with their peers. That's just one of the many, many things, but it can really hurt kids.
That's so interesting. Like, it just flies in the face of so many things. Like, oh, kind hands, gentle hands, keep your hands to yourself. All of those phrases, which you hear just everywhere.
Yeah. So Wem, I just have to tell you this story then, because all this kind hands, gentle hands stuff. There's a girl in my son's school. This is a couple of years ago now, who has special needs, and she had Down syndrome, and she loved to push people. It was a way that she played. And a lot of the kids didn't like to be pushed. So she wasn't making very good friendships with those kids. But then she started, because she was a girl, so she started with the girls. They didn't really like it. Then she came over to the boys, particularly the boys who were a year or two older. the way my son was. They had mixed grades. And she would push some of the boys and they'd giggle. And then they gently push her back, and she loved it. And so then she became friends with this whole gang of about 7 to 9 boys who got to be friends with her because of a pushing game. And they knew that she had different needs than other people. And they loved it when that's how she played. And they let her in. They always fought over who got to have, Claire on their team when they were playing soccer or football. So they were wanting her, instead of saying, oh, she's going to be a detriment to our team, we won't win if she's on our team. They were, oh, we want her on our side. They just enjoyed her company. And it all started from pushing and enjoying the physicality of that.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, I mean, you describe in the book how, if we're facilitating this type of play, actually, in some ways, is quite simple. It is just about being there and observing and checking in, but teaching the children, as you keep saying, all these strategies the kids can use without an adult once they've been introduced to it. So it's that thing about checking in. Are you still having fun? Are you still happy? Reading faces, all of those kind of things. And you just have to model it a few times and be there. But it doesn't mean that you have to just squash that type of play instantly and go, no, that's not nice, or no, that's hurting the other person, until you know that it genuinely is hurting the other person.
And back to Lewis's question about what are some of the benefits of this kind of play. One of the amazing benefits is peace skills. So if kids are playing rough and tumble play, especially if they're new at it, it's probably within the first, would you say, 10 seconds that they're going to have a conflict, right? Because it's high energy play. So if you have some kids playing quietly, doing something either with toys or outdoor materials, and they're doing it together, they may go for quite a while before they have a conflict. But when you're doing high intensity play with physical touch, pretty soon someone's going to pull my hair or pull my shirt or hit too hard or do something I don't like. And so the potential for teaching and practicing conflict mediation is enormous. And adults need this practice. Conflict mediation is a skill that you can learn, but it's helpful if you get repetition and you learn over and over when you feel like, oh, I didn't like that. To notice you don't like it, then to realize what it is you don't like, speak up, tell the other person directly, and set a limit and have the other person hear you and be heard. That's amazing skills. That's the level of skills that we expect international diplomats to try to use, Yeah, in fact, definitely. One of the graduates of my childhood preschool, she went there as a 2-year-old, 3-year-old, and 4-year-old, and she learned all this conflict mediation right from very young age. And she went on into graduate school in international relations. She's a young Muslim American girl, and she specialized in conflict mediation between Western and Islamic countries.
Wow.
And she credited her preschool for her interest in this because she realized it was a skill other people didn't have.
Yeah. Wow. And it's such a transferable skill, as you describe. It's like it starts in a game of rough and tumble. We have scramble nets in our woods, which we put up, and it always creates a lot of conflict because some people want to lie really calmly, like it's a hammock, and other people want to bounce as hard as they can, and other people want to wrestle. And so there's a lot of mediation going on there. But then that it is that skill of being able, as you described, those steps of explaining what you don't like, talking to the person directly, setting the limit, is so transferable. And actually, we had an interesting learning moment for us because we were working with one group, and I think it did start on the net, Lewis, with carrots. Was it, or was it wrestling?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it was a really interesting learning moment for us because we were talking through, okay, so people don't look happy. What rules do you guys want to put in place in this sort of wrestling game we're playing in the big bouncy net? And they came up with this thing of oh, well, if you're pinning me down in this wrestling match, if I say carrots, that means enough. That's the safe word, is carrots. Mm-hmm. And so then they were using
it was because because it was in the games, in character, they wanted to be able to say, stop it, you, get off me, you do the thing. And they realized they needed a separate word so that they could differentiate when are you in character saying, you'll never get me, stop it, you're getting me.
Yeah.
And when is it me, the person, in and out of character. So they were like, let's use carrots as our word.
But then it became kind of almost like a mythical thing that was like passed down through that all the new children just learned that if you want someone to stop when you're doing physical play, you say carrots. And then suddenly we have this realization that this is such a transferable way of communicating, that this is probably, we're teaching the kids these skills, which might occur.
Someone came back and said they used it apart.
Yeah, they used it apart, and obviously people don't know what that means. So we were like, oh my gosh! Now that this word is disconnected from that original experience, we need to cancel. We need a group meeting right away.
They're in the park going carrots, everybody, carrots.
And we were like, oh my
why
God.
are you still hitting me?
And this could actually be used in a much more serious situation than just playing in the park. Do you know what I mean? Like, this is powerful flipping stuff. Yeah. Like, they could be in a situation where they really need to say stop.
And the kids can learn that carrots works with, say, within a family. We had code words within our family that we knew were just us. And we knew, in fact, my family, when I was growing up, we used the word stop. But and that meant stop. We chose the word. It wasn't very creative, was it? But at least you could use it outside the home.
Exactly. It makes sense. And it filters into all of these things, teaching about consent from a really early age, which, and you're saying about, sex ed begins in preschool in your book. And that this is almost, we're starting now, right? Even in this like physical play, it is about learning that stop means stop.
Right.
And
in fact,
I don't like it means
one of the chapters that the editors weren't so sure about was it's okay not to kiss grandma.
Yeah.
And I think, well, that's important. I mean, you can't be slathered with kisses, even if she is your grandmother or your grandfather or your uncle or whoever it is. You need to have the right to say no to certain types of touch. And they're like, well, we'll get all the grandmothers angry and then they won't buy the book. I'm like, sorry, this is about, respecting somebody's body. And sometimes the body wants to be touched and sometimes the body doesn't want to be touched.
Hey, lovely Forest School people. I know people listening to this, you are bored of doing damper bread. You are bored of doing marshmallows. You're probably bored of doing hot chocolate. So I wanted to let you know about the book Forest School Cooking that I've written. It is half recipes that are going to take you away from the boring marshmallows and damper bread that are driving you mad and into like cool meals and things on sticks and fast things and slow things. And the other half of the book is all about different ovens and stoves and things that you can build to cook in different ways. I know we personally have had it where you realise that what we're doing this week, we're frying something on the frying pan. What we're going to do next week, we're going to fry something in the frying pan. So building up loads of different ovens like rocket stoves and pizza ovens, it's all in the book, and it helps you to grow your cooking from something that the kids are just waiting to get the sugar into them to something that they're actually enjoying and getting a bit more out of that cooking. So you can find your copies on Amazon of Forest School Cooking and take your cooking to the next level today.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And but that's interesting, isn't it, that it taps into those kind of like generational expectations of, like you were saying, with fathers and grandparents possibly having the positive side of like, well, I wanted to do this as a child, or I had to do this as a child, and I remember and it was great. But also those things can be passed down in a slightly more negative way, where it's like, these were the expectations put on me.
I had to put up with it.
No, now you will have to put up with it. And it takes,
it goes both ways, doesn't it?
It does go both ways. I saw something the other day that was saying that. So I'm very firmly in the like millennial generation, and it was saying that when we were children, the prevailing wisdom was like adults needed to think about themselves and not busy themselves too much with what the kids were up to. And now that us millennials have had children, the prevailing wisdom is that we should be catering to the children's needs. And it's like we got skipped in the middle. We're breaking some cycles, but we really got skipped somewhere in the like, well, when do my needs come in then?
Right. You don't have, well, that's one thing I hope that this book does bring out, is that adults have needs too. So when we're helping to set limits,
Definitely.
That you want to, because sometimes, of course, people who had more controlled childhoods, they want their children just to express themselves and be free. and then feel like they never get any, oh, I don't really like that. But as an adult, you can set limits just the way a child can set limits. So it's not just a one-way street. Oh, that's too loud for my ears. You can yell, but take it outside. It's too loud standing right next to me.
Yeah, the book does, sort of early on in the book, you talk about the difference between sort of this kind of approach and a completely permissive one.
Right.
And I think that is a really difficult area for some people. And that's,
it can be confusing. Yeah.
So confusing. It's so confusing, both in parenting and in running a sort of an educational setting.
Right. And it does, as far as people reading books, at least in this country, the parents who are overeducated, and I'm putting that in quotes, the ones, see, we're from a university town where there's a lot of PhD and professors' children and so on. And so that adults are very high academic learning, but they have no clue what to do with their children. And so they tend to be way permissive. And they they're trying to do what's right for their kids, but it seems as if they have too much school learning themselves, that they have a harder time finding that balance, and that they need to understand that there's limits for everybody. And that's how people get on in a group, is setting reasonable limits on each other.
That's interesting. And in the book as well, I think you have, I can't remember which chapter it's in now, but you have a little example of a time where a parent will have to say to a child, I know if we were at home, I would be allowing you to do this, this, and this, and that would be fine. But we can't do that here because it's a different environment. It's going to affect these other people and all that kind of stuff, which I think is really key, because I think for some people, they feel an ethos very strongly with their child. I want to parent them in this way. But then when you try and transplant it into a place where that's maybe not possible, or it's infringing on other people's limits, that's quite tough too. So I really appreciated that inclusion of that in the book.
Yeah, because it happens, right? I mean, no matter how ideal you might make your own family or your own program, the world has lots of different colors and stripes and varieties, and we need to be able to adapt. And I think kids are totally smart enough to realize, I can do this at grandmother's house, I can do this at so-and-so's house, but when I go to school or when I go to the library, I can't wrestle in the library. Like, wrestling's great, but not in certain places. And so they can realize different places have different rules, different people have different expectations. As long as they're able to express their needs for play somewhere, their full range of needs, they don't have to have their needs met at every single moment.
Yeah.
That's a good point. We've said before that there's so much learning in the grey areas, but they are the hardest to facilitate as a parent and as a educator. The great, and like, that's where I think I can really empathize with, like, it is way easier to, I mean, I hear all the time, no, we don't throw things. We don't. So there's two parts in there. One is, it normally happens after someone's just thrown a thing, which sort of undercuts the thing of we don't throw things. So you're like, yeah, we do. Look, it works. Watch it.
Kids can be so cruel. They can. Thanks, Mom. Yeah. Anyway.
But and then the second bit in there is the we, which is weirdly, like, manipulative. But but the point I'm trying to make is that I can see the appeal of having blanket statements. Women and I have both said that is, when you're an educator in like a mass education setting, like a state school here, classes are, 30 odd kids with one, maybe two adults. You don't have the capacity to do the nuanced gray areas of, okay, well, wrestling's like, it takes time. And that's what we really value in where we are, is that we have a small number of kids with a high number of adults, and we're able to take the time to embed these things. I wondered if you had, so there's lots of what's in this book is obviously amazing for parents to be doing it in the home and day to day. I wondered if you had any sort of educators come back to you and go, look, I really want to do this, but time wise, finance wise, staff wise, I'm just not able to put this in. Has that come back to you in any way?
Well, depending what kind of program or school that it is, it's not going to work in some places. And I have had people read the book and quit their job and go found a new preschool based on the philosophy of this book, and then tell me about that. Or they would write up the rights of the child, which is how this book starts, not with the rules, what you can't do, but with the rights, the right to feel safe, the right to be outside, all these things, and blow up those words in a big poster-sized poster and put it in the front of their brand new school and say, this is how we're going to be here. So not everybody does that, of course, but there have been several programs that have started because they realize, yeah, where I am is not going to ever accept this, but this is what kids need and this is what I need. So they go off and found a new program. And there are places that you can only apply some of these ideas because you want to keep your day job and this is what the rules are, like no weapons at the school or whatever it is. So you have to say, well, I can't take that bit of wisdom, but I could maybe take the sharing part. So some people have to pick and choose, and other people just say, hey, this is what life is meant to be, and they go off and create it. It works really well in a program, but you do have to have some buy-in from the people around you.
Yeah, and parents being on side as well.
Go on, sorry, Wen.
Yeah, because that's another thing we found is that if you're going to do these ideas and the ethos, you need a way to be able to communicate it to the parents so they know what they're getting into. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Because otherwise they're going to, come to you and say, my child said that they were fighting at the school, what's happening? And you have to go, yeah, that's true. So we've ended up having to sort of laminate a few of the ideas and put them on near the tea and coffee at our toddler group, for example, to kind of explain why we're doing certain approaches.
And that's a never ending job because the parents that come to you will continue to be new ones. And they're on their own journey. You can't rush their evolution in their understanding either, especially if it's their first child.
Yeah.
And especially if they think the child should be born peaceful and going to solve all the world's problems by their exemplary behavior. You know, if it's their fourth child and they've been through a few things, they're going to be more easygoing on the whole. Or they might completely switch. But you can't, just like you can't force a child's emotional development, you can't force the parent's emotional development, but you can set expectations and continually reinforce why it's good child developmentally, what you're seeing, the growth in the child, and giving them an idea of what to expect, and then saying, hey, this happened today. We had some wonderful rough and tumble play, and this is all the things they're learning. Kind
of broadcast all the stuff you're doing.
But it's never ending. And to make you feel better, the teachers at my childhood preschool, they do copy out pages of the book too, or say, oh, go read this chapter, because they can't remember exactly how to explain it at all times. So they just say, this explains our philosophy.
That's a good tip. And I wanted to ask also whether you think that the approaches, because it's very much based in sort of early years practice or practice with young children. Do you have any stories of people using this, or have you yourself used this with these approaches with older children at all?
The fundamental ideas here, accepting all the feelings, but not the ways it might come out in a destructive manner, setting limits, listening to other people's limits, sorting out conflicts, those things are any age. You might slightly tweak the wording, right? You wouldn't want to say exactly how you say it to a 2-year-old, 3-year-old, the way you might say it to your spouse. But people use it on their partners. They use it on their college age kids because it's basic human behavior. It's really ageless in that way.
Heather, I was going to ask, you just mentioned weapons, and it's just reminded me of a really in-depth conversation I had with someone. In my childhood, it was very much guns are not allowed at all. No plastic guns, no holding a stick in the way that it is shaped like a gun. It was really drilled out of me to the point where I don't think she might be saying, but my when we went on a holiday recently, my son asked if he could have a little toy gun from a shop, and he was with one of my parents who said, I don't really feel comfortable buying you that. He came back and told me, and I had a slight swing the other way, and I went and bought a load of Nerf guns to have in the house. But one of the conversations I had about weapons was with an educator who was from the States, and they were saying, well, we just can't do that here. That's fine for you guys over in the UK, because I know one person with a gun, and I've only known them as an adult, and it has, and it's legally, he has to get psychological testing done every year, and he has the ammunition is in a dead bolted box on the other side of the house to the gun, and they were saying, that's why, because it's different in the States, they were saying we can't do that kind of gunplay with kids here. And I didn't have the book with me at the time, so I didn't have the time to go, no, let me just, think it through. But do you
a terribly touchy
is
topic,
obviously...
right? I mean, especially in the States.
Yeah.
But a lot of Nerf guns are sold here. That's one person you were talking to who felt that the reaction is can't even go there, can't touch it, and a lot of people feel that way. Others are full bore the other way. So, and then there's a lot of people in the middle. It's mostly the adults who are very tied up in knots about this. In the US, we have two different aspects of it. One is keeping the children safe and alive, because there's so much gun ownership in the country. In the state of Michigan, where I live, I think it's well over 60% of adults have guns in the household. And of course, I live up north, where there's a lot of deer hunting, and this is just a normal part of life. In fact, a lot of the local schools have no school on the first day of the deer hunting season. So this is part of culture. It's part of the environment where we live. But it's not usually the deer hunting type guns that are the problem. But if you have a child who is 3 years old or 5 years old or 7 years old, doesn't matter how old, who is fascinated with toy weapons and toy guns, and they go over to a friend's house or a grandparent's house and they find a real one, that's a life and death issue. They need to have... it's the adult's job to keep those away from the kids. But so when in the US, when we're talking about playing with toy weapons, we have to also include in that conversation the very real side of things, that they may encounter a real weapon. And so there's the play aspect of, yes, encourage the ideas, but there's also the safety aspect of, besides safe storage, is if you see something that looks like not a toy, don't touch it, come get a grown-up immediately. You have to train that knowledge at the same time. But if you have a kid who's fascinated with toy guns and you say, don't play with guns, that interest is not going to go away. It's going to go underground. They are then going to play with guns behind your back, and that could endanger their lives or the lives of somebody else. So it's a very real thing. If you can't make somebody not interested in something. If they're interested in superheroes, or they're interested in Star Wars, or they're interested in their own creative ideas about the lava monster that has this special lava gun or something, you can't make the interest go away. It's like saying sleep. You can't just make somebody sleep. We've all figured that out. We wish we could sometimes. So if they have the interest, I'd much rather see the interest taking place in front of me, so that it's not taboo, so that they're not doing it behind my backs, because that's extremely terrifying. So that's one aspect of it. Yeah, it is different culturally. And today in the US, even my childhood preschool, they're less comfortable with having the kids play with toy guns than they were when I was a kid. But they'll other toy weapons, usually swords, they feel is a little more fantasy. Maybe it's not quite as real life. And so more people are likely to say yes to a toy sword. Even though if you think about it, it's like the stick. They're actually more likely to poke each other and physically get hurt, right? Than playing with their fingers in the shape of a gun, or a piece of broccoli in the shape of a gun, or whatever it is,
Yeah,
so
I was going to bring that up, because that is what happens, isn't it? So even if you say, if you said, oh no, you can't play with that toy gun, then it's like, oh, but this stick looks like a rifle, I'll use the stick. And then you go, no, we're not going to use sticks as guns. And then it's just the hand, like they have this.
You can't stop it.
You can't. You really can't. Right.
And I think it's dangerous to stop it. But there are a lot of places that are, this is one of the places where we have real life and real major social issues that are a problem. And then we have children's right to play. And sometimes they do collide, and you have to decide, where do I have a child that really needs this kind of play, and where can we do it safely? Because there's also neighborhoods in the US where it's not safe to have a child outside playing with a toy gun, because it's just not the right place to do it. Maybe the child is too tall and they think he's a teenager. Where can you do it? Okay, maybe you need to play with this. Can we find a safe place? Yes, the basement at Grandpa's house is the one place you can do this kind of play.
Yeah.
You got to find a place.
Yeah, and thinking about the people who are around as well and observing. So I was having this conversation with my friend, and she is from the UK, and I was sort of talking about this, and she said, well, yeah, that's okay in the theory. However, I have been held at gunpoint. I was and tied up, and when she was working in a city, and if my children start playing that way, I'm going to feel extremely triggered, and I won't be able to be there. So it's that element as well, isn't it? It's about
absolutely.
She can set that limit and go, I'm not comfortable being here,
right?
But she also accepted that if her kids needed to do that, she would be happy for them to do that somewhere else, but she can't be the one observing them.
Absolutely.
And
that's the sort of thing. I mean, you don't even have to have been held at gunpoint. Hopefully most of us have not. But many people don't like a toy gun being pointed at their face. So we just had a rule in our house. You have to ask before you shoot somebody. Do you want to be shot?
Yeah.
And so my 3-year-old he couldn't quite get the grammar right. So he'd say, you want to be shoot? And he'd ask everybody. And if they said no, he'd have to point. He'd say, okay, I'll shoot the trash can, or yes, but not my face. You can shoot my shoes. And so then he would point at their shoes. And it's just like, ask first. It's only polite.
Yeah.
We have that so much with stuff. And it's interesting, isn't it? Trying to find that line between, because there are some times where it's a play cue, like you were describing with your brother and jumping on someone's back and wrestling them. And that could be a play cue, but it can also be after a few times, you hope that you would get into the hey, do you want to wrestle? And those verbal agreements before you start doing those things can just help smooth all of those play cues coming out, even if they sometimes feel a little bit clunky, because you're asking someone to go, I know you've got this bubbling up urge that you'd like to, it would be the perfect time to jump out from behind the sofa and just fucking have them. But maybe, just whisper. My kids are really good at doing stuff in and out of role. So the back of the sofa might whisper to me, can I jump on your head? And you're like, yes. Oh, I hope nobody jumps on my head. Like that. Right. Helping that through. Sorry, thank you for answering that, because I realised I've just brought up a big subject there.
Not a big subject.
Can I bring up one more? Have we got time? I know I'm really conscious of not taking up too much of your time, Heather, but I've got a question about a kind of another controversial thing that I have found, I guess probably one of the most challenging things to kind of implement and explain to other people, which is the idea of you can't play is all right.
I knew you were going to say that one.
Yeah. please can we just talk about it, especially because we've even read Vivian Gussin Paley's book and spoken about this on the about it on the podcast, which is you can't say you can't play, we're gonna that's a phrase that is outlawed in this setting,
and we've got her here now. Would you like to have a fight?
So
that is a tremendously big one, and I think it's actually, if you come down to it, bigger for most adults than the weapon play. We might react faster with the weapon play, but deep in our hearts, we're really worried about exclusion. And there's many good reasons for that. But I think some of it comes down to our personal, everybody's been excluded and it feels awful. At some point in our life, maybe it was the lunchroom when you're 12 and you don't know who to sit with, or maybe it was asking someone on a date, or, whatever it is. It's social rejection is really tricky stuff, and it hurts when it doesn't go right. So what we want for the next generation, and we want this so desperately, is that they will all just get along and they'll all be friends and we'll have world peace. Right? There's sunshine and daisies and unicorns, and our generation has problems, but the kids, they're so innocent. They're just going to solve all the world's problems. They might, but they need some practice. And I think the social rejection sections of the book were actually the hardest to write, because it's very hard to put into words what the concept was and why it's so respectful to be able to say no to having somebody join. That's a hard concept. And how very much like it is, you were using the toilet example earlier. With taking turns with a person, it's really like taking turns with a toy or any other object. If you can play with the swing as long as you want, if you can play with whatever toy it is as long as you want, it's the same. You can be with a person and take turns with their time. Be in their company. You don't have to suddenly be with someone else's company. And there's a whole host of reasons. I mean, when they're young, there's developmental reasons. They're just coming out of parallel play where they're not used to coping with more than one person. Maybe they can play side by side. They're each playing with horses, but they can't play with them together. And then eventually they begin at age 3 and 4 to play together, but they can't accept a third person. And then developmentally, they can start accepting more and more people, but maybe they're just developing a friendship and they don't want someone. It's like you at a coffee shop with your best friend and you're going yabber, 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 yabber. And then, your partner steps in, says hi, and you love your partner, you form a life with them. But when they walk in on your conversation with your best friend, it changes the dynamics. It's not that you don't like them. It's just you wanted that time with that one person. So you really want them all to be mature enough to say, hi, great to see you. See you at home later. That they're not going to be offended because they can't come and join your play at that moment. It's the same with kids. Sometimes they just want to enjoy the company of one other person. But so to give a couple of examples, kids, just like adults, will say no when they're scared or they're worried somebody's going to do something they don't like. So I watched a couple of kids. There were 2 girls who'd made a little tent and they were playing some game inside the tent, and it was so fun that a boy named Ben gave them the highest compliment, which is wanting to join them. Like, ooh, that looks cool. I want to do what you're doing. That's the highest compliment for play, right? But they had made a sign that said no boys and no tigers. Mm-hmm. Now, there were a lot of kids in dress-up clothes that day running around and being lions and tigers and all sorts of things. And so that's why they had the no tigers part. And so when Ben expressed an interest in joining them and being in their tent, the teacher said, well, they got a sign. Let me read it to you. No boys and no tigers. And then, do you still want to play? And he's like, yeah, I want to play. So they brought all the kids together and said, well, Ben wants to join your game. What would happen if Ben joined your game? There's that one of those phrases you can just pull out of your pocket. What would happen if Ben joined your game? Because that's when you're going to hear what the fear is. He's going to growl. Why is he going to? Well, tigers growl. That's what they do. We don't like growling. Okay, so could Ben come in if he promises not to growl? Oh, sure. So Ben, if you want to be with these 2 girls, you have to not growl. That's their rule. Oh, okay. So then they played together the rest of the afternoon, and he was a boy wearing a tiger suit. And they had said no boys, no tigers. But when they found out what the real problem was, which was the loud growling noises, and he was willing to stop growling so he could be part of their game, that's setting boundaries, that's solving conflicts, that's listening to each other. That's inclusion. Yeah. And as you were saying earlier, Wem, that these things transfer through the years. These skills don't just stop right now. So one of the girls who graduated from my childhood preschool went on, she was in elementary school. She was probably 8 or 9. And she had learned that she could do this. If what's going to happen that you don't like, she was learning how she could set limits on other kids, and it was becoming second nature to her. So when a girl joined her class who was having a lot of problems at home, I don't know if there was divorce going on, but this girl was kicking and biting people a lot. And the other kids didn't want to play with her because she was not predictable and they didn't want to get hurt. So nobody would be her friend. But she really desperately needed a friend. And she went up to the girl who'd gone to my childhood preschool and asked her if she could play with her at the recess time. And she said, yes, if you don't hit me and you don't jump on me and you don't bite me. And the girl said, okay. And then they actually became real friends because she knew that if she set these limits, that she had some control. She wasn't just scared. And that the beauty of saying no to people and setting respectful limits is that it brings greater inclusion over time rather than exclusion. But what we get scared of is, but that's not nice. And they're going to turn people away. And we need to be, we can't discriminate against people and we need everybody to get on. Well, what's more fair and respectful is to find out what the problem is. Don't force people if they're not ready. And when they are ready, accept them on terms that everybody can get on with. Yeah, that's a very hard set of concepts to sit with, but it's what makes us human and work well together in humanity.
It's one of those things, isn't it? It is hard to sit with, but it's no one, I don't think anybody could listen to what you've just described and say, but that's unreasonable. Do you know what I mean? We all know that that's reasonable deep down.
And also,
we just have this inner conflict.
And we're scared to ask that question. What will happen if he joins your game? What are you worried about? What is he going to do to you? Because we don't want to hear that answer. But we have to hear that answer, because if you don't know what their fear is, don't be scared of the answer. They're going to tell you.
And also, there may be times where, so we would do this approach at Forest School as well, but there might be times when the answer is, the thing is, we're not scared of anything. We just, a bit like your example at the coffee shop, we just want to be together right now. We are playing this really good game, and it's just for two people, and it's just for us. And it doesn't mean we don't like you. We might play with you later, but this is really important. And the answer is no, you can't play.
Exactly.
And
what's the worst that can happen is they might say no. And setting that expectation, like, we have to cope with rejection, and we have to, like, I can come with you. Do you want to play with them? They might say yes. They might say no. And setting that expectation and having somebody not ask for you, but stand there and be with you, so that when you're mad and you're sad that they said no, that you can cope with those sad feelings, disappointed feelings. That's all it is. And we're going to be disappointed throughout life.
That's it. And at least you're in a place where, so it's that idea of social risk, isn't it? So we talk about risk in Forest School a lot, and that would include social risk and feeling comfortable that you can ask, with the possibility that you will be rejected or the answer will be no, but then there'll be somebody there with you, or it's a community which will support you in that difficult time, as opposed to never practicing those things and experiencing that feeling
devastating. Right.
Yeah.
And of course, there is a whole chapter, which we won't get into, but about people. There are certain kids who will be chronically rejected. There are some kids that it seems like wherever they go, they're always the ones singled out. And if it happens repeatedly, and it happens for certain, then that kid needs some extra help to learn some social cues and some play cues to be able to be accepted. Or maybe they have to work through some anger, or whatever it is they have to work through before they'll be accepted. This is more occasional rejection. If you're busy with a friend, or if you're worried about something. But we do have to watch out, because there are some kids that just need extra help gaining some of these skills.
Or I can imagine also times where there is genuine prejudice there, for example, where somebody is being excluded because of something about their appearance or their ability or their language, which is a whole different, it's so nuanced, isn't it? And as practitioners, we're there to watch for that. As you say, if it's something that's happening repeatedly, is it always one person who's always being excluded, or a group of people? And why is that? And be ready to help in those situations, because again, just going with that, this is just our rule, and it's just, that's verging back onto that permissive thing of like, the kids are in charge, and it's such a delicate balance to watch and to check in with each other as well. So I might say to Lewis, I've just noticed so and so being excluded from this. Have you noticed this? And you might see patterns, and something that as you say, you can step in and help there. Thank you for
You're welcome. You're bringing all the big topics up at the end, so
I genuinely could sit and chat for way longer than we have time for. I'm conscious that anytime you can give us is amazing. But so if people have listened to this and they want to find out more about your work, or about, because you've started writing young adult novels more recently, where can people find out more about your work and about the School for Young Children and things like that?
My books are all on my website, heatherschumaker.com. So some of them are about early childhood education. One is about land conservation, natural habitats, and one is a children's book. It's a ghost story, actually set in Somerset in England.
I wanted to ask you that, because it's just up the road from us. We're really not that far from there.
I can see Somerset from my window.
Well, that's where a lot of my family lived, and I visited there a lot. I lived in England for a year. Went to school when I was 11, and we have a lot of family still in England, and most of my family lived in Somerset when I was younger.
Do you still have family there now?
Yes, but mostly in London now.
Okay. I was going to say, if you come visit, come for a cup of tea, because
no, I can't. Because I couldn't handle it. I genuinely wouldn't. No.
Well, I can. You're very welcome to come for a cup of tea, Heather, anytime. If you're ever in Somerset,
thank you.
Come visit.
I'll be giggling in the corner.
Excellent. I look forward to that.
Pink beard and pink tutu, just to try.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Heather, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Pleasure. Thanks so much, and thanks for
Amazing.
all the good work you're doing with the kids and getting them outside.
Oh,
We need that.
yeah.
This is my book about land conservation. I always tell people, if you don't get kids outside, how are they going to fall in love with the world and want to preserve it? You got to get them out. So thanks for the work you're doing.
Oh, amazing. Oh, we'll leave it there then. Thank you so much.
All right. Take
I
care.
would say good night, but it's the middle of the afternoon.
Yeah.
for you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.